The very common notion among women and men is that the money matters are usually left to men. And that's the notion we on The Money Show as well have been trying to dispel right from the beginning. We'll continue our efforts towards that direction, not just today, but for the foreseeable future, until it is amply established that gender has nothing to do with your skills on money management or in any area of life for that matter. But since we are The Money Show, we will be zeroing in on money management. To talk about this and more, I have with me Arpita Vinay, the co-head of Centrum Wealth. Arpita, it's great having you with us today on The Money Show, and wish you a very happy Women's Day, and you and of course your team at Centrum Wealth as well.
Thank you, Mubina. Wish you and the viewers a very happy Women's Day too.
All right. Well, let's move on, Arpita, and talk about this often. And what I spoke about right at the beginning, right? This notion that many women have in their mind. Many of them are working, they have a job, they have their salary coming in, but when it comes to money matters, they usually leave it over to the husband, to the father, or to any other male member of the society. I think to start off with, why do you think it's important that women take charge of their own finances, even if, of course, they have a great secure relationship with their father or their husband or whoever the male member is?
So two questions here really. Women and how are they placed to handle money from a personal worldview point of view, and the way sort of I've gone about my personal life and career so far. I'm the eldest of three sisters, and my father sat me down when we were little, and we were told that financial independence was absolutely non-negotiable. And all three of us are are financially independent and have successful working careers. That is my personal context, but I think it would be unfair to use this broad brush for the world at large. And when you say a lot of women delegate or are a little underconfident handling money matters on their own, that's bang on. It's unfortunate, but actually it's bang on. And, just to share a few statistics there was a recent survey that was done by a large asset management company, about 4,000 women and men interviewed across 8 cities. And a few startling things came by. And I wanted to start with sharing some of that, because first and foremost, it's important to realize what's happening around us, what are the biases around us. The first one was that, about less than 10% of women that were surveyed make their financial decisions independently. The point that you mentioned, that they end up, delegating it to their spouses or partners, or at times even parents. Compare it to about 65% of men. So about 2/3 of men take their financial decisions independently. The survey said 1/3 took the women, or 1/3 of the women took the decisions independently. But even in those 1/3, most of it was influenced by either the husband or parents, or had to be forced. Net 1/3 of 1/3, so less than 10% of the women take their decisions independently. And even in those decisions that they take, the more significant ones, which is related to retirement planning, which is related to asset purchase, are actually in the male domain. The ones that they are more comfortable taking involves the spending decisions on household expenses, etc. And so two things there really. Despite the change in narrative and a lot of women becoming financially independent, very few of them take the decisions independently. And wherever they do as well, the domain is largely limited to financial household expenses and not to the material ones, including retirement planning and asset purchase. And why is that so critical for women to sort of take the decisions or get more involved? And I'll sort of talk about the most important one here, which is retirement planning, which is almost an end in itself. And it's not something that's limited to India. It's something that is there globally as well. Women's retirement account, and I'm talking about right now limiting it to urban working women, their retirement accounts are a lot less funded than those of their male counterparts. Largely on 3 or 4 counts. First, women tend to live longer than their male counterparts. Second, and that's a topic for later, but the median pay for women is much lower than that of their male counterparts. Most of the time that they end up taking a career break to support, including for raising children or taking care of the elderly. And also their appetite for risk assets is lower. So, you tend to live longer, you tend to make less money, you tend to save less money because of the breaks, and the portfolio generates lower returns because of the appetite for risk assets being lower. And that's a very dangerous scenario to be in because the danger of actually outliving your expenses is very, very high, especially for women. Therefore, I would strongly recommend that, beyond the expenses, beyond the spending and beyond the saving, very, very critical that women get involved. And it's not really a rocket science. They're basically about 3 or 4 pillars to a financial plan. For women specifically, the first thing would be to understand your biases. And invest in financial literacy. It's not very difficult. If required, enroll the help of a financial advisor, but be in control of the framework. Understand what you're getting into. And the financial plan at a very basic level basically involves 4 things that you need to be aware of. The first one being, understand very clearly what your resources are, and that's something that women intuitively are very good at. Understand your cash flows, understand your expenses, understand what is a bad asset and what's a good asset, and saving up for your children, saving up for creating a house, a mortgage, even acquisition of a car or whatever, versus a consumer debt where you're funding lifestyle expenses through your credit cards and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, get a handle on your resources, get a handle on your cash flow planning, manage your expenses well. There was also a recent survey said that and that is something that should come handy for women, is most of the men start with what is left after their expenses and that is a starting point for saving. For women, it's the other way around. You start with how much you want to save, and then you work backwards to your investments. So first and foremost, look at the resources available. Second is spend time understanding your personal risk assessment. It's extremely important because your tolerance for volatility gets tested when times are really very difficult. And last 1 year has sort of shown us all of that, from a near despair in March around this time to the euphoria that's been in current times. So spend time understanding your personal risk assessment, create a contingency fund so you don't have to dip into it in the worst times. The third step would be to understand what money means for you emotionally and otherwise. What are the goals that you want to plan for, be it retirement, be it some lifestyle related expense, be it your kid expense, and the time horizon. Because a lot of times your risk appetite depends on the horizon that you have. If your retirement is 20 years away, your appetite, the risk really is investing in a fixed deposit, which gives you 4% when your inflation is 6%. And not the volatility that a growth asset gets. So the third thing would be have a very clear understanding of what does money mean and what's the time to that. And fourth is obviously working to a plan, which means construct a portfolio and manage it on an ongoing basis. You can take help from advisors, but be sure to understand the framework. And there again, a good mix of, I wouldn't want to get into too much of sort of technical conversation here, but have a good mix of income generating assets and growth assets. Within growth assets, be sensible about, using some active and passive vehicles as well. Have a good, your health insurance and life insurance taken care of, especially if dependent on you, and so on and so forth. And have a will in place. The succession laws for women are extremely complex. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, Arpita, you've covered very, very vast, actually, number of tips. So you answered my second question as well, which was going to be what should be the starting point? Because a lot of women would argue that, okay, I'm ready to take charge of my finances, but, where should I even start? These women may be from a diverse set of backgrounds. Some may be doctors, some may be teachers. So they may not really be having the know-how of or the financial savviness. So I think you've set them up as well on the right path on where they can start. Women, of course, they should first get a handle of what their monthly cash flow is, what their expenses are, and be in charge of the framework when you go meet your financial advisor as well. Arpita, I want to ask you now about, and at that point where you spoke about how in your family the setup was such that you were given the mandate that you have to be responsible for your own finances, you have to be financially independent, that was non-negotiable. So I think the idea is to start them off young. So what would you tell the parents of all daughters, young daughters, on how they can sort of ensure that their daughter does not grow up to believe that I'm going to have a husband to take care of me, or if my father to take care of me, etc., because this mindset is so deeply rooted in society that it's almost impossible to eradicate it. So how would you sort of set them off, if we have to put it, teaching daughters young on financial planning?
I'm glad you asked me that question, because I'm also a mother of a young daughter, and my daughter is 14. So, getting into initiating them into the money conversations early on, whether a girl or a boy child, extremely important. And second, especially for women, the same conversation that my father had with me, I had it with her early on, that, it really doesn't matter whether it is a secure relationship or not. Financial independence is 101, and that's something that they need to be. That's a conditioning that you need to inculcate at your family level early on, including your dinner table conversations, getting them involved in the basic framework of a budgeting, taking them to a bank, getting them to open their first account, understanding the whole concept of nothing is, it's not too early to get them acquainted with the concept of capital markets and so on and so forth. So involving the girl child in early on, one from a behavioral point of view, that financial independence is something that should be ingrained in them. And second is having money conversations, mature money conversations, having conversations about what they can afford, what they can't, working to a budget, what is about instant gratification and something that they should work towards from a plan point of view. I think these are some of the healthy tips that all women should incorporate, boy child or girl child, but especially more so for a girl child. It was done to me, and that's how I'm bringing up my daughter too.
Okay. Another very often asked question is financial planning for housewives. Firstly, Arpita, this is one section of Indian women that don't really have a income as such. I mean, the one source of money, of course, is the money that's usually given by the spouse to manage the household expenses. Sometimes it includes sort of a personal monetary compensation as well. So I mean, would you recommend that housewives should look at it as more than something that's just a ghar ka kharchi, and that would perhaps help them as well to add on a skill set for themselves?
No, absolutely. Because, initially when I spoke about retirement planning and safety net, it's all the more critical for housewives because they don't have their own independent source of income. And if they're not very familiar with the whole concept of, the safety net and how to go about that, and, in the unfortunate event of the primary bread earner or the primary earner not being there, they will be subjected to life of abject poverty for a very, very long time. So it's a question of survival. So to all the housewives out there, it's extremely, extremely important to get involved. And beyond the expenses and beyond the spending, get involved and upskill yourself, on the basic concept. And it's not very complicated. It is about making some time for it, but very critical because there you don't even have the safety net of your own income. And if God forbid something does happen to the primary earner, there's absolutely nothing to fall back upon. Start early, get involved in beyond the jargon that is used. What does it really mean at a very basic level? In the options available either will help you preserve your capital or grow your capital. So invest in understanding that. Invest in understanding your nominations, your joint holdings, your wills, more so for housewives. And and a whole lot of, and I think women are temperamentally also better suited for, they tend to be a lot more cautious, they're nurturing. In my personal experience of about 20 years of dealing with clients across the board, I've found women a lot more tempered in their expectations. They don't get swayed very, very, they have a better understanding of what their risk appetite is like. So there's nothing that should come in the way. It's a question of making time for it, and especially for housewives, all the more critical because they don't have an independent source of earning. So must get involved, and a small step daily will sort of help you. Even in the conversations with financial advisor, just sitting in that initially will be a good start.
Okay. In your first answer, you mentioned about how women tend to live longer than men. So how does the overall profile of a woman, when it comes to defining how their finances would be different, compare with that of a man? This is one characteristic that you spoke about. What sort of repercussions would that have? And in general, if you could just, throw some color on that. Is it that, when you consider a woman's finances, the risk appetite is lower or higher than a man's?
2-3 things there. The risk appetite is usually lower, or women tend to be more cautious. But that's also a function of how familiar you are. When we are not familiar with in any area, if you're not very familiar, you tend to be a little cautious. And I think a large part of women being cautious or not having the appetite for risk assets or being comfortable with a fixed deposit over an equity asset is because you're not familiar with it. And if you're not familiar with it, then you would end up thinking that, working within your zone of familiarity. So that's one, that women, most of them who are not, and obviously the women who manage, do money management for a living or are in financial services, their risk appetites tend to be a lot different, primarily because they're a lot more familiar with the investment landscape. So the first way in which women stereotype differs from that of their male counterpart is they end up being cautious, primarily because they don't understand or they haven't spent time in familiarizing themselves with the investment landscape. The second one being that they're, typically in an urban household today, you don't have 3 months or 6 months of investments tucked away. Imagine a life where, if your working years are 50 or 60, 60 is a retirement age, which comes from the thinking that, when the average life expectancy was 60. So if your working years are 50 or 60 and you end up living another 40 or 50 years, expecting that the savings will last you that long, by itself is extremely mind-boggling, and not having, and that's one thing that you cannot fund from loan. Almost everything else that can be funded from loan. So from a retirement plan point of view, the fact that it has to fund a lot longer years and that it cannot be funded by loan is a very, very important sort of a dimension. And women, across the board, the number of years may differ from one country versus the other. If you end up, so imagine a situation where you end up living longer, your appetite for risk assets is lower. You may not be very familiar. The kind of future can be very uncertain and scary. And therefore, spending time so the starting point would be spending time to familiarize yourself. Because what seems like a comfort zone, what seems a fixed deposit at 4% or 5% in the current environment may seem like a comfort zone, but at the margin, you're losing almost 2% of capital every year. So, so to go back, we have a situation where women live longer. We have a situation where, therefore, the money has to work a lot harder. But because the familiarity is not very high, you end up being in the traditional and the safe comfort zone, investment options, which may not be generating the return that you need to do.
And you think, Arpita, that is one of the biggest mistakes that women make when it comes to managing their money?
Absolutely. Because the concept of risk or concept of capital is not what you see, right? So, on any urban, basket, your inflation actually will be 6-7% or upwards, because there is the average, the way the commonly understood inflation basket constitutes very, very primary items of fuel and food and so on and so forth. Add to it the lifestyle. So an average urban household will have a inflation of about 6 to 7%. And if you're investing in assets or investment options over a period of time, which do not beat this comfortably by at least 2 to 3%, you are losing capital. That's the most important thing to understand in financial planning. And therefore, to that extent, money kept in a bank account, money kept in a fixed deposit, money kept in anything which earns less than. That is not to say that you shouldn't have a safety net. I mean, that is to the extent of the contingency planning that you need to do. The most important financial myth is that preservation, a 3% return or a 5% return is preservation. It is not. And in the current environment, if you don't invest in understanding the growth assets and investing sensibly there, the expectation from the money is so much that it's invariably going to disappoint you. So that's the one. And if I was just one takeaway from a conversation that we're having today, is irrespective of male and female, what is risk or what is a bare minimum portfolio return that needs to be there, that needs to be understood better. And for women, especially because of their lack of familiarity with the landscape, all the more important that you spend time understanding that. That's a big problem, yes.
Well, Arpita, really appreciate you joining us today on The Money Show, and, really appreciate you doing your bit as well to ensuring that, women in India, of course, are empowered when it comes to taking control of their own finances. It begins at home. It's wonderful to know that you're doing it with your daughter. You're ensuring that, she's taught the right principles when it comes to, being financially independent. And I really hope that parents out there draw inspiration from you and, ensure they are teaching their daughter as well the very same thing. Thank you so much for joining in once again.